Good morning, everyone. Um, it's just turned 11 o'clock, so we've got a good number of people joined us already. We're going to just give a couple more minutes to those that are on their way, just to make sure that everyone hears the introductions at the beginning, and then we'll be ready to start the session today. So if you could just be patient for a couple more minutes, we'll then make a start. Great. Well, thank you all very much for joining us today and welcome to Coeo's latest webinar. Today we're going to be discussing two of the industry's hottest topics, artificial intelligence and Microsoft Fabric. I'm lucky enough to be joined by three experts today, and I'll ask each of them to introduce themselves so we can learn a little bit about them. As I go around my screen, I'm going to be asking you, so kicking off first, Christian Bowman.
No pressure there, James. So I'm Chris or Christian. I've worked for Coeo for a little over 7 years now. Originally in our managed services team, working mainly in SQL Server, and then I gradually sort of pivoted over to our consulting team, working on anything from Power BI, Data Factory, Synapse through to Fabric. So a bit of an all-rounder. I do a little bit of everything in the Microsoft space in terms of analytics. I'm willing to give anything a try. Yeah, that's me. I'll hand over to Terry.
So I'm Terry. I've been doing this a lot longer than Chris, and for more years than I care to remember in the data and AI space. I started my journey in Formula One. Moved through most of the big four consultancies, delivering data projects, both visualization, engineering, and now as we move into this new world of AI. So, Gary.
Thank you very much, Terry. So Gary Keegan, I am a solution engineering manager here in Microsoft based out of Dublin. I manage a team of data platform and AI apps solution engineers looking after the UK and I market, mid-market segment for Microsoft. Managing the team for about 4 years, but I'm about 8 years inside of Microsoft as a whole. Prior to managing this team, I was a cloud solution architect for data and AI working in Western Europe. And prior to my time in Microsoft, I'll be a little braver than Terry. I'll say 17 years prior to that, sitting in customer data centers around the globe, working for a large telco, kind of doing a lot of implementation, well before cloud was on the field. So look, great to see everybody here. Looking forward to today's conversation. Back over to yourself, James.
Thank you very much, Gary. It's great to have experts from Microsoft and Coeo on hand today, and I'm sure that will, as they share their views and opinions on this, that will raise some questions in your minds. So please do, as we go through the session today, share any questions that you might have in the Q&A for us. It's a lot easier if you use the Q&A rather than chat, but I will try monitoring both. We will try to attempt to answer them as we go, but if I do miss any during that period, then we will just round the ball up at the end to make sure all your questions do get answered today. So let's get started with the topic of AI in Fabric. And so to get us started today, I'd like to ask each of you, what does AI mean to you in the context of the workplace today? And I'd like to start that question with Gary.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose if I think I was thinking about this earlier on, right? So, I mean, I started Microsoft, like I said, 2018. Data and AI, we were very much focused on, two different scenarios when it came to the AI conversation. It was Azure Machine Learning Service or Studio for kind of those more in-depth kind of machine learning use cases and scenarios. And then we had our cognitive services, which were very much unique topic space. So it was like key value pair extraction, or it was sentiment value. So two very different offerings that we had. And then about 4 years ago, the whole AI conversation just kind of got blown up, right? OpenAI and the availability of models and what it could potentially do completely changed the conversations we were having with customers, and the service offerings that we were talking with customers was completely changed, right? So I mean, what Microsoft ended up doing was, developing Copilot. And I always started, when this all started happening, I said to customers is that, look, we have these services now, Azure OpenAI, and these services are available for you to do what you like. Look at what Microsoft does. Copilot is our implementation and our version of what we can do with these tools implemented across the entire landscape inside of Microsoft. So really, Copilot isn't really just a Fabric feature in itself. It's kind of part of Microsoft's kind of broader vision to infuse AI into a lot of these products, kind of creating these kind of consistent kind of AI assistants and build that experience right across the workplace, right? So M365 Office for apps and Teams and Outlook. Dynamics 365 has that within the business apps space. GitHub developer coding. We've got SecOps for Copilot. And then we've also kind of got cloud management within Azure. And then even within Azure itself and all the services in there, there's elements of Copilot there. So often the confusion always comes up. We need a Copilot expert, but often it's the case you need a Fabric expert that understands the Copilot elements within Fabric, right? So really, the whole point of that is, when you're writing, no matter what you're doing, the idea is that if you're writing a document or building a Power BI report, kind of triaging support tickets or managing cloud services, there's an assistant really that can kind of help you kind of get to that point. But like in terms of where we are at the moment, yeah, there is a big inflection point in the workplace. After years of these improvements on these generative AI services, it represents basically a step change in terms of how customers are using them, right? We often talk about it's akin to like where PC and smartphone was introduced into the marketplace. So really, we talk about, is it revolution or evolution? It's kind of a bit of both, really. Tools like Copilot can reimagine workflows, rather than just speed them up. You can manually query a database and building a slide deck. An analyst can kind of ask Copilot to generate insights and draft these slides essentially, and completely, so it creates a completely different way of working. It is a confusing landscape for sure. Sometimes it's hard to know where to begin. And I think really the kind of whole point of today is to kind of help you get a better sense of where you guys are, or where your operations, where your business is at this particular point in time. How AI within some of our more kind of cutting edge tools like Fabric has kind of gotten to where Microsoft is at that point, and then maybe some of the insights that we might be seeing in the future when it comes to AI within Fabric.
That's great. Thank you, Gary. And I think just that opening statement helps clear up some of the confusion I've seen clients have around the term Copilot, because to your point, Copilot is Microsoft's way of infusing generative AI into all of the products. That doesn't necessarily mean it's one single Copilot product across the whole suite of tools. There's interoperability between them, but they're very much separate tools for specific use cases and scenarios that customers will be using. So if they're in Windows or in Office, they might be using M365 Copilot. If they're in Power BI, they'll be using Copilot for Power BI, which are designed to solve specific challenges that users have with productivity in those particular workloads. Great. Let me pass over to Terry next. Terry, what's your opinion on where we are with AI in the workplace at the moment?
Yeah, so I was listening to Gary's answer there, and I was thinking about how it's changed my role in the last 2 years. So as a principal consultant, I spend a lot of time with clients. I spend a lot of time doing architecture work. I spend a lot of time also in the email world and trying to respond. And I've used it to make what I would call not the low value tasks, but the swivel chair things I have to do, like triaging my emails, summarizing my meetings, drafting that first response back, and then I built, agents where that I could go on a Monday morning, tell me what I didn't do last week, and it summarizes my week. It tells me what I missed. It tells me what I did. It tells me what I need to do this week. And I built all that into my working practice using Copilot. And then I took it further. Like I want to understand, what our clients are doing for our meetings, and people have meeting FOMO where their calendar's overwhelmed and they can't attend everything. But now using Copilot, I don't have to attend everything if the transcript is there, and I can start getting the information I need. You also, get other people involved in those meetings. And if I want to go, I need to create a slide deck for a client, tell me what's happened the last 3 calls we've had, especially in the pre-sales world. I can bring that up in an instance using the M365 Copilot, and it then gives me more time to focus on, our clients, the architecture work we do, more creative stuff in the AI world to offer as offerings for Corio, by taking away all the things that used to cloud up my time. So that's how I've seen my role and how I've used Copilot in the last couple of years.
That's fantastic, Terry. I'm going to have to tap you up to share some of those agents. They sound fantastic. Have you found that it's taken away any of the good stuff? It's great that it's taken away the drudgery, but are there any elements that you really enjoyed that it's taken off you?
No, because I think you can, with the right prompts and the right agents and the right safeguards, you can get it to do the things that you just used to drain your time. But there is the element of, it's also a bit of a buddy sometimes when I'm sat here working and I haven't, everyone else is logged off, or I'm working out of hours, or I'm doing something, or no one's around. I want to ask. You can start a conversation with it about, I've got this problem, or I'm trying to envision this, based on its experience. And it's great for answering those sort of questions and helping you come up with ideas that you can then be creative about involving into a client deliverable.
Brilliant. I do now realise why you contact me less these days, because you've got a new best friend. But that is where it's worse for me. But good for you. Great, Chris. What are your thoughts on where we are with AI today?
Yeah, sure. I think Terry hit on a lot of really good points, and so did Gary as well. And I think for me, I get asked a lot by my less technical friends, what are you going to do when AI takes your job? And I think AI isn't going to take my job. I think what it does do a lot of, as Terry said, is it speeds up a lot of those kind of mundane tasks, whether that's, in the weeds, actually debugging syntax errors and things like that. In the past, I'm sure a lot of people will kind of resonate with having spent 3 hours looking for a syntax error only to find they were missing a comma right at the start. So things like that you can put your code straight into Copilot and say, what is syntactically wrong with this? And it will just give you the line number and the character and any other bits you might not have noticed yet. I also use it a lot for what I call rubber ducking, which I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with. I do have an actual rubber duck that lives on my desk, but it doesn't talk back as well or as much as Copilot does, which isn't always useful. So what I mean by that is, if you have a problem you're trying to solve and you've been looking at it for a long time, sometimes it's hard to see the wood for the trees. And actually just saying it out loud and actually talking through what the problem is and getting some ideas on how you could solve it. And quite often you'll come up with the solution yourself. So I think Copilot's really good for that. And I don't think enough people use it for that. Also, like rough ideas. So in my day-to-day work, but also my personal life, with hobbies and things. So you might have an idea, but, not have thought how to follow that idea through into actually implementing it, or want to grow that idea into something bigger. So again, just talk through those ideas with Copilot or any other LLM and actually build them into kind of what you want them to be and what you see them being. So I think for me, coming back to the question, so what does it mean in the context of my workplace? I see it as an enhancer and kind of a bit of a peer programmer. So someone to bounce ideas off and use to kind of enhance what I'm doing rather than it being a threat to take my job, for example. I don't see that happening. So hopefully that answers your question, James.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Thanks, Chris. And just to follow on from that, Chris, do you really see where we are with AI being the start of a revolution, an evolution, or something completely different?
I think it doesn't really matter. I think the key here is not to be left behind. So, to my point, learn as much as you can, take all the training there is to offer, whether that's learning how to implement, Fabric Copilot agents or Microsoft Copilot agents, or using AI Foundry, or just using Fabric or any other AI tools that are kind of built into the Microsoft ecosystem and wider. There's so many different free resources to learn. So you've got all the Fabric in a days, the agent in a days, Power App in a days. You've got all of the free Microsoft Learn content, which is really good, and sometimes actually gives you kind of lab environments that you can use. Obviously, there's paid courses as well, whether that's Coeo or other partners. And then I guess as well, like ironically, use Copilot itself to teach you. You don't need to know how to use it. All you need to be able to do is ask the right questions, and then Copilot itself will tell you how to use it, or the agents within various different parts of the Microsoft ecosystem. So yeah, I don't really see it. It doesn't really matter to me whether it's a revolution or an evolution. I would encourage everybody not to be left behind in whatever it is.
Yeah, fantastic advice. Thanks, Chris. And whilst you're got less experience than other members on the panel today, you've still had to learn AI because generative AI is so recent in the context of computing and technology. That's been something that's actually developed in market in the time that you've been a consultant. So the advice that you've just given there is all based on your own learning experience of picking up this new technology.
Yeah, absolutely.
Great. Okay, on to a question for Terry next. We've heard about Copilot being available throughout the Microsoft ecosystem now and infused into many of the products. A lot of our clients are quite interested in using Fabric and the Copilot capability that comes in there, but I've spoken to a few very recently, even in the last few weeks, that have been scared off it because of the cost implication of using Copilot. Could you just explain what the licensing for Copilot within Fabric is, and how people are billed for it?
Yeah, sure. So when Copilot and Fabric first got together as a product, you had to have a SKU or compute power of what they termed the Fabric was an F64. April last year, Microsoft got rid of that and now make it available to all SKUs from the F2 upwards. Now, while there's no extra charge for using Copilot in your Fabric capacity, it comes part of your monthly your cost. That what needs to be aware of is the reasons you want to use it, and how much you want to use it. So if you're running on F16 or something very low spec, because that's what you're on your start of your Fabric journey, you've got to remember that the Copilot will use those capacity units. So if you're trying to do a pipeline and you've got users trying to ask it questions of maybe your semantic model, that all adds up to compute power in the Fabric world. And what then ends up is the pipeline runs slow, your questions run slow, and people then start questioning the use of Fabric. So it's really key not to, the first part of the question is, no, there isn't an extra cost, it's part of your Fabric world, but really understand why you want to use it and what capacity is right for you at this moment in time. What do you want to use it for? Do you really want to use it for certain areas like your semantic model? I guess the gotchas are, people that want to implement it, or our clients want to implement it where it's not available in that region just yet. and you have to have admins look at maybe cross regions, which may incur some more costs, or maybe you've got to change reasons, which may incur you some costs. But as a out of the box tool, it's there in everything now from an F2 upwards. And I think we're quite thankful for that as data partners, because not everyone wants to start their Fabric journey on F64, but everyone wants to start their journey with Copilot, and it's been great since last April. We see a lot more engagement with it since Microsoft have reduced it down to an F2 capacity.
And in reality, does an F2 have enough compute and memory resource to be able to generate Copilot tokens fast enough to be used?
I think it will depend on the scenario. We work on some proof of value concepts for our clients, which an F2 is quite acceptable. When you're looking at enterprise scale, honest answer, no, because you're looking at hundreds and possibly thousands of users, not only maybe with a complex data engineering and ETL process, but also then users trying to ask questions on a daily basis. People don't always want to look at a dashboard and try and work out where, how many licenses do I have? How many cars do we sell? They want to be able to ask Copilot and say, as of today, how many cars have I sold in the US? And but that takes the compute power away. So you've got to understand what you want to use Copilot for. Where's your journey going with it? Are you going to move away from models where you're going to have people just trying to ask questions of the Copilot all the time, or whether you want a balance of those two things?
And you can target Copilot at the data. Can you also target it at the models as well, the semantic models?
Yeah, yes, we have clients that quite do that. I mean, again, it will depend on most people's scenario, but a number, especially in enterprise, everyone maybe or maybe not familiar with the medallion architecture in our data engineering world, where you've got the different layers of data and how it's cleansed. But the end user only ever sees that gold standard data, the semantic models, the raw tables, and you can point it there, point at your semantic models, make it available to them. We also have, a couple of data scientists, people that get involved with the silver layer, or that more granular level data, and you're using Copilot and other agentic AI models to interrogate that level now to help them build their own models. So, to go back to your original question, no, it's in your Fabric capacity. F2s probably aren't enough for anything more than a point of proof of value and stuff like that. But Copilot will help you at every level.
Brilliant, that's great. And Gary, can I just ask you a follow-up question to this?
Sure, absolutely.
I understand it's probably more an enterprise, or at least a sort of large business feature, but I understand that it's possible to offload your Copilot compute off your capacity that your end users are using and onto a dedicated capacity for that.
Yeah.
Is there a benefit to a customer for considering that as an option?
I mean, yeah, absolutely. I mean, it really kind of ties into this situation that Terry talks about, right? Because having separate dedicated capacities managing separate workloads, it would be part of a lot of our reference architectures and scenarios like that. But especially if you've got some very kind of business critical workloads, it could be data model refreshes for typical Power BI, semantic models being hosted on the platform, or it could be that you have end of week or end of month pipelines for data engineering that need to be run. If those are critical and they are then being interrupted by interactions or multiple interactions all happening around the same point as that, it's always good to have kind of a separate capacity that's kind of managing that from that perspective. Also, just to kind of keep it in mind, Terry covered pretty much everything from a licensing perspective. I think by default, I think in the US and EU capacities, by default, Copilot is enabled, right? But anywhere outside of that, you have to enable that yourself. So if you have a capacity that's deployed in any of the regions outside of that, it's something you may need to look into to ensure if you're finding that it's difficult from that perspective. And then in terms of availability, I think Copilot for Power BI was one of the first. It was the first Copilot within the Fabric ecosystem that was deployed. We've since seen preview versions of that across all the pillars of the Fabric portfolio. So from an engineering and from a warehousing perspective, if there are business requirements around not launching things within preview, people need to kind of keep that in mind as well. But so that's just one of the things that we always talk about with customers, is just kind of what are the demands of the business when it comes to running anything within preview.
That's a really good point, and I think that's something that organizations need to think about in terms of the context of use of preview features. So if they're concerned about using a preview feature in production, that might not stop them from using Copilot to help the data engineer in developing their code, because essentially that engineer is using that as a productivity gain rather than to run Copilot in production to automate the data ingestion. So I think it's really important that users and customers look at the usage of these features and why they're using them and where in their life cycle, to make sure they fully understand what that feature is doing and how it's behaving, and make a decision about the acceptability of that in a production environment. That leads really nicely on to thinking about data engineering. I'm hearing the term vibe coding coming up a lot in the market at the moment. It's definitely come from the software development ecosystem, and it's now making its way over into data engineering, and the term is cropping up more and more. And there's lots of benefits to using a large language model to support and assist the engineer in the development of the ETL process, but there is some risk associated with that as well. And one of our colleagues, Sam Boot, recently posted an interesting article on the benefits and the risks of using a large language model to generate code as part of your development lifecycle process. We're also seeing organizations starting to write frameworks that lean on the capabilities of large language models to improve the efficiency of data engineering. And very recently announced, Microsoft have purchased a company called Osmos, which again uses generative AI in order to assist with the data ingestion into Fabric. So as this is beginning to gain some critical mass, I think it was really useful to ask a question about how can we start thinking about the AI capabilities that are in Fabric and apply those to the data engineering role. So Chris, I'd really like to come to you and ask you about how I could potentially use Copilot to help me write code faster and more effectively, especially in languages that I'm not so familiar with. Maybe I've come from a TSQL background and I'm beginning to pick up Spark notebooks and starting to look at Python. So to help me go through that learning curve and improve my own productivity.
You personally, James, or generically?
Yeah, me
else?
personally, as a rusty old developer.
So I think the first question I would ask is, what language are you trying to write in, and what languages do you know really well? You know, what is your kind of ballpark? What are you familiar with? And I guess
I wouldn't say I know any languages particularly well anymore, but I come from a .NET C# background with TSQL as the database language that I would have been familiar with back in the day.
Okay, yeah, fair. So if you know SQL really well, but don't know Python, what I would say is use what you know really well. So when you speak to Copilot, you could say, this is what I want to do in SQL. How do I do the equivalent of that in Python? And what you'll find is it does those conversions almost really well and really easily. If however, say you're trying to write in Python, but your background is C#, so the basics of coding, like using functions, parameters, that kind of thing, then I guess you could truly speak to it in spoken word and tell it what you want it to do. The key problem here is you don't know the syntax, but you know all about the basics of coding. So I would, again, going back to my previous statements, I would treat it like a peer programmer rather than kind of a subordinate that you expect to do all of your work for you. If you kind of treat it like that friend, that peer peer programmer, you know, I'm looking to do this, I'm trying to do this, I need a function to build this. Give it as much kind of detail as you can. So, you know, I want a function that nullifies an entire data frame. Don't know why you'd want that, but as an example off the top of my head, you know, I want to pass in a data frame. So you're giving it those instructions and that clear definition of what you want it to output to you. And I think the clearer you can be, the better the output you'll get. If you're not really sure what you're asking, then I would probably start with some leading questions around kind of what is best practice, what is, how do I do this, and so on and so forth. So a bit of a long-winded way to say it depends on your experience and kind of how I would tackle that problem. One thing I found Copilot's actually quite good at is, you know, things like in pipelines within Fabric, for example. I write pipelines all the time. What I find one of the most mundane, boring bits is actually just, you know, build me a pipeline that takes data from a SQL server, iterates through it, and does something to it. It won't give you all of that filled in, you know, with all your connections and stuff like that, but it will give you a template for how to start filling that in. And then if, you know, you want to build expressions and things like that, what it will do is it will take the output from your initial tasks and pass that into that for loop. So you can use it to speed up the process, but not necessarily do all of it for you. So
how is it in terms of like checking my code? If I've written some code, could you get it to essentially review it for you and give you some guidance on how you could improve it?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's one of the key things I would encourage people to do, especially with code that Copilot or other LLMs have written, is actually get that language model to talk back to you, explain what it's done, why it's done it, comment your code. And if it gives you an output that you don't understand, ask what it's done and why, because it might be adhering to a best practice, or it might have hallucinated something from a previous comment you've made, which you might not want in there. It might not be intended. So, you know, interrogate it, ask the questions on things you're not sure about, and ask it to clarify if you're not sure.
Brilliant. That's great advice. Thanks, Chris. Gary, are you seeing customers use Copilot in the data engineering role in different ways from how Chris has described it?
I mean, not particularly differently. Like, I mean, a lot of the time it is a case of, you know, yes, it allows you to basically leverage your own strengths, and they basically, through an element of just asking kind of natural language query versions of it. So you could say like a Spark data frame, for example, for like a sales table. You know, if you don't understand Python, you just basically ask it to create a bar chart based on that sales data table, and it'll output it from that perspective. So a lot of those situations it does, because a lot of the conversations we've had in the past about like, right, well, you know, from a data warehousing perspective in the past, we would talk to customers and say, you know, where's your experience? Like, are you guys all building everything in Python, or is everything in T-SQL, like, or do you have everything in .NET? Like, where's the experience within the team? And we typically talk about services and things that'll help them based on their expertise and their knowledge. What this allows it to open up is that, like, right, well, yes, it's probably still good to stick with the tooling and the languages in which you guys are proficient in and that you guys are experts in. It doesn't now mean that you can't now have conversations on like, okay, well, what about managed Spark in a situation like this? And it kind of simplifies from that perspective. But what's interesting that Chris mentioned there as well is that, you know, it comes back to his previous points earlier in the session here, which is that it's a kind of a peer rather than getting it to do everything for you. But some of the mundane tasks around documentation for any code that you've developed, like all of those things, you can just use Copilot. You know, and it could be within GitHub, it could be within Fabric in itself, but it allows you to basically take up some of the time-consuming tasks when it comes to writing code. So those are the situations, and those are certainly the features that resonate with a lot of the customers that we're talking with. So yeah, it's very much in line with what Chris mentioned.
One thing, if you don't mind me jumping in, James, but one thing I would add to that, which I've seen, you know, agreed with Gary, it's really good at documentation and those mundane tasks. one thing that you do have to be careful of is if you've written the code yourself, but you haven't commented it or annotated it, and then you say, right, Copilot, comment my code for me. One, I would double check that it hasn't changed anything else that it fancied, because there is, some cases where that can happen. So just make sure you test properly and you're careful. But also, as soon as some people see the obviously AI generated comments, they assume all the code AI generated, even if it's not. So just as a kind of word of warning, I suppose, I would just add that in there. And you can try and get around that with careful prompts and things, but just be careful and save your original code would be my advice.
Very good point. Yeah.
I think it's really interesting to use it almost like a reverse comprehension tool where you're asking it to document for you, and then you're checking that it's understood that code as you intended it to be read. Because it's very easy when you're writing code to get a bit involved in it, build something that's beautiful in your view, but then you realize that actually that's not very easy to read. And by getting the Copilot to do that, you're testing whether your code is actually easy to consume for another AI or human.
Yeah, I mean, we're doing something similar with one of our clients at the moment where we're doing the quality and standard of coding, so you could ask Copilot to write you a function that returns a data frame. Will it be 100% accurate? No, you've got to do 80% of the work. And sometimes they get complicated. What we're putting on top of that is also making sure that, code and standards are adhered to by our data engineers. And during our testing, during our release process, we're making sure that it is basically you are doing all the correct stuff like commenting and all that, so it can check a notebook that there are comments and that in there, but and also indentations and all that good stuff. But also you can ask it to check your work and going, could you write this any differently or more effective or optimize it? And by putting those questions in as well, you start getting your code and data quality better as well by using models at different stages of that data engineering process.
Yeah, that's great insight. Thanks, Terry. And I think that leads really nicely on to my next question for Chris, which is how can AI help us with data quality as we're ingesting and transforming the data?
Yeah, that's a really good question, James. And I've put together an actual demo for this for a customer a few weeks ago. So if you give me a second, I can probably share my screen and show it and talk through it. Let me know if you can see my screen.
Yep, coming through loud and clear.
Cool. So all I've done here is I've spun up a kind of demo lakehouse within Microsoft Fabric. I've just called it Lakehouse Demo AI, so just showing you how to add it. So on the left-hand side, when you come into a notebook, the first thing you have to do is click Add Data Items and actually link that default lakehouse into the Fabric notebook. What you also have to do before you can get started with anything Copilot within here is actually start that session. You can either use a standard session or a high concurrency session. It really doesn't matter. We're not going to go into too much detail about the difference between those two today, but if it's something you're interested in, let us know and we can. Once that session is started, what we can then go on to do is actually take a prompt, click on a cell. So in any cell in the top right, you'll have this little Copilot button. So what that does is opens up a prompt. You can then put in whatever you want that cell to do. One thing I'm just going to touch on before we kind of move on is there's two ways that you can actually use Copilot within a Fabric notebook. So you've got this within each of the cells, and you've also got this Copilot at the top here. I'm hoping you can all see my mouse. If you want Copilot to actually write code for you, you need to use the one on the cell. If you just want it to kind of summarize the notebook, talk through what it's doing, that kind of stuff, then I would use the one at the top. If you ask the one at the top to actually write code for you, it will write the code for you, but you've got to then copy it out and put it in a cell. So here, all we're going to do is we're going to get some sample data from a one of the Microsoft links, which Wrangler uses. We're going to save it into a data frame to use later. I don't want it to save that data frame to a lakehouse just yet. And what we're going to do is we're going to display the full table at the end. So once it's thought about it, it will pump me out some code. It will show me what was there before and what it's written. Once I'm happy, click that accept button and it will add the code to that cell for you. You can then run the cell, and as you can see here, we've got a table of Titanic data. What we're going to do next is, as James has asked, if I don't have any experience with Python, but maybe I do have a little bit in coding, we're going to say I want to create a cleansing and validation function that meets the following criteria. So this is all about adding those kind of guardrails and checks in place that you want it to do. So I want my functions to be reusable and generic. I don't want them to be a one-off just for this data set. I want the data frame to be able to pass in a list of columns to apply those functions to. And I also want to pass in an entire data frame. So if I wanted to apply, as I said earlier, terrible example, but null the whole data frame, I want to just pass that data frame in and it would do to the whole lot. I want my functions to be named consistently and generically, and I definitely want to include a function that writes the data frame to my lakehouse, and give it a bit of extra detail on how that should work. Cool. Again, you get the output from Copilot here. So on the right, you can see it's pumped out a whole load of generic functions for me. You could use these as a starting point, or you could write your own, or you could ask for some very specific ones as well if you've got your own kind of validation and transformation needs. In this case, James doesn't know what he wants, so we're just going to give him some generic ones. Once we're happy that those functions have been written, ordinarily we'd obviously do a lot more testing, check that they actually work, do what we want, put them through dev, test prod, etc. And then what we're going to do next is actually write that data frame to a lakehouse using the above function. So what we're demonstrating here is that this cell actually has context of the previous cells and what has come before it. So I haven't given this prompt a name of a function to use. It should just know which one I want to actually use. And then as you can see here, it's pumped out write df to lakehouse. So it's identified this and it's filled in all of the parameters for me. Once I've done all that, I'm just going to click run all at the top. It will then run, bring the data in, it will define all of my functions, and then it will write my data frame to the lakehouse. One thing I think is really cool is you could either, at this point, if you don't know Python, I want to display that table that I've now written. So there's two ways I could do that. I could open up a new cell and ask Copilot to do it for me. Or in the window on the left here, what I can also do is find my table that's been created, right click on it, press load data and click Spark, and it will just write that for me. So I think with all things Fabric, and I know this is an AI webinar, but just to big up Fabric a little bit, all Fabric does across the entire board is all about lowering the bar to entry and making all of this tooling as accessible and easy as possible. So whether it's using AI or the native built-in features in Fabric, I think the whole of Fabric does a really good job of doing that. And I've mentioned Fabric in a day already once, but if you haven't been on it and want a kind of intro to Fabric and some of the tooling, I really recommend that you sign up to one of those and get on it. Thanks, James. Hopefully that answers your question.
That was fantastic, Chris. Thank you very much indeed. I think that pretty much wraps up what I wanted us to cover today in terms of the data engineering role. But if we now move forward and start looking at business users and how they can take advantage of AI within Fabric, I think one of the areas that we're beginning to see are business users wanting to have a conversation with their data. They may have specific questions that they want to ask, and traditionally they will have needed to work with someone with some capability in Copilot to design and build the visualizations, connect those to the models, and then present that to them. Whereas we're now seeing that Copilot has added capability to support that within Power BI. Gary, do you want to just talk a little bit about how business users are using Copilot within Power BI?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I suppose if you think about it, maybe if anybody was using Power BI maybe about 7 years ago, probably even less, there used to be the old Q&A functionality, right? So once you deployed things within a dashboard, there was a Q&A element to it. It was pretty effective, but like I think you'd very quickly run into the limitations within the service and within the platform. But what we're now beginning to see is, you know, because of this whole unified data platform that we've got in Fabric, they've introduced these data agents at the moment, which think of it as like an AI assistant that's trained on enterprise data. So a lot of the times that this is kind of a specialized chatbot that kind of knows the answer to questions using your organization's data that might be sitting in one lake. So it could be in a lakehouse, it could be in a warehouse. But the idea is that you can configure that data agent, tell it its data sources, what it can access. So certain tables, organizational ontology, or it could be through the AI search functionality, you can access some unstructured documents as well. But then essentially a user can basically query that agent in the natural language. So it is, yeah, it's a conversational data exploration, kind of like if your data warehouse had like a chat interface. One of the things about that data agent functionality is the ways in which you can kind of access it. So you can integrate it directly within Copilot Studio or within Azure AI Foundry, or you could just use it through the Fabric interface as well. It depends on where the business is at that particular point in time. So I think it's probably we're seeing these data agents as an evolution of that old version of the Q&A functionality in Power BI. It extends beyond just doing simple querying within the Power BI report, but actually full querying across the entire data warehouse beyond just what's actually funneled towards a visualization within the Power BI element.
Fantastic. And that leads on to Terry. Have you seen our clients begin to explore the capability of the Microsoft Fabric data agent, and how are they making use of that?
Yeah, very much so. I had a few conversations last week, and someone asked me to describe it in like 2 words, and the best way I could describe it is it's like a data concierge. You know, you ask it a question and it will come back with the answer. And you know what it does is it goes away, takes your question, it goes through the Fabric. You know, is it a lake house? Is it a warehouse? Is it a semantic model? Is it, you know, KSQL, is it the DB in there, and it will then generate or validate its query. It will then come back with your answer. But the key point is it does it all with the safeguarding and the permissions that you have on that data. So if there's row level security, column level security, it respects all of that and will bring you back your answer. And you know that Q&A feature that Gary was talking about, it was great. You could only ask it once. You know, you could ask follow-on questions for this. You know, you could start having a conversation about your data. And the other way I see a lot of clients use it is that, you know, we work with a load of very high tech, you know, insurers and other clients where they've got internal teams and they're investing times in that and their energy in that, and they build their own agentic AI models, and they link them together. So you've got multiple agents talking to each other. So you know you can have the Fabric data agent being the one that's being the data concierge and asking the question, and it goes away and asks a different agentic AI model that comes back about particular bits like that business, and they talk to each other, they have a conversation, and you get the answer. And we'll start seeing a lot more of that, you know, using the power of that Fabric data agent to be that front line, but then hooking in to custom agents that people have written for their own business purposes. So things that, you know, Copilot wouldn't necessarily understand and answer correctly because it's not ingrained into that business section or domain or that particular business, but building your own custom agents and linking them with the Fabric data agent, especially in sort of Copilot Studio and stuff. We're seeing a lot more people are investigating in that. And the same with the AI Foundry, you know, using the services in there. People are experimenting with that idea as, you know, machine learning models suddenly becoming large language models and becoming agents that, you know, and then also trying to work out, can you streamline a process? So, you know, call centers are always the first one people think about is that, can you streamline this process? We don't want to annoy people that want to phone up and talk to someone, but can people that don't want to talk to anyone or just want to do WhatsApp or conversation, can they start using these data agents and custom agents to get the data they want as well?
I had a really interesting conversation just last week with a client that's actually looking at using the Azure Data Agent to allow the operations managers within a call center understand agent performance better. So this isn't about changing the business process in terms of how the agent interacts with the customer, the customer services person, but it's actually about how can the managers of those members of the team understand individual and group performance and find areas where they can improve and offer a better level of service and improve the overall customer experience. So I think there's lots of different ways that this can play and provide a lot more value. We haven't had any questions in the Q&A yet, so I'm going to ask another one. If anyone does have any questions, please do drop them in for the last few minutes of this webinar, because I'll be very happy to share your questions with the team. But Terry, obviously we are going to be using some pretty sensitive commercial, possibly with some IP and possibly with some sensitive customer data in the mix when we start looking at data agents and Copilot and all of the AI capabilities. Is there any risk that my data could be sent out to a public AI model and then that model use that data for training purposes?
Short answer, no. It stays within the Microsoft backbone. It stays within Microsoft architecture. So, things like your prompts, your responses, your business content, they don't go to the public. They are used in, Microsoft hosted, OpenAI, direct models, and your tenants with your security and your permissions. And, there's zero chance that it leaks out in for other trading models. It's quite a common question. The one thing I'll add to that is to think about where data residency and data governance sits for your particular clients, because think about a Copilot license. So if you have your Copilot running in Fabric, but it's not in a region, and you've got to do cross regions for that data, sharing that data across regions is another thing. So it's not public, but there will be data residency laws that say I can't move my data out of this country. You've got to be careful of those sort of things. People think that turning Copilot on is enough. You still have to be careful and sensitive about, okay, I'm processing it in the UK, but actually because I don't have Copilot here, it's getting sent off to the Netherlands or something. Is that acceptable? You need to think about that as well as it just being a public zone. But to answer your question, no, it's all within the Microsoft backbone infrastructure.
And that's a really good point, that you need to consider where that AI processing is actually taking place and make sure that you're compliant with your company or your business, organizational and potentially any legislative requirements that you've got against your organization as well.
We work with clients, I'm sure Gary does as well, where data can't leave the country. So you need to make sure the processing of that data is still on Microsoft infrastructure in that company, in that country.
Yeah, good point. That leads on nicely to a question that we've had from VJ in the audience. Gary, perhaps you might like to give a response to this. Does Copilot and Fabric comply with enterprise regulations such as GDPR, HIPAA, and SOC 2?
It does, yeah. I mean, the one thing that Microsoft takes incredibly seriously is not just security, but just ensuring that from whether it's an industry specific policy around data governance, that it's in line with that as well. And it's something that I constantly bring up, is that the most important thing that people need to take on board when it comes to starting any sort of project, and it could be just onboarding Copilot, or it could be talking about some of the functionality we have here, is the security and governance. And it's one of those things that we're beginning to include, not just when it comes to Purview integrations, which is typically our kind of data governance and policy management tool across not just Azure, but the entire kind of Microsoft ecosystem. But beyond just using Purview, things like introduction of preview features like Fabric IQ, which is really it kind of feeds nicely into a lot of that. But yeah, I mean, in terms of our usage of that, it pretty much is in line with a lot of those individual, regional, and industry specific policy managements that are deployed. Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you, Gary. So I've got one more question that I'd like to ask each of you. And I'll start with Chris. What's the biggest mistake companies make when deploying AI in data platforms?
Sure. So I think for me, it's lack of preparation. So companies jump in wanting to do AI without really thinking about what their use cases are, what the business benefit is, and what it could actually add to their business. So, from my experience, projects or initiatives that are kind of business led tend to be more successful for a variety of reasons, but also, tends to give better outputs when you then start to actually use AI services such as LLMs and things like that. So I think start from the beginning, build your data foundations and actually do that properly. For Power BI, you want a star schema that's modeled well based on your business processes. Don't just stick it all in one table and hope for the best, because AI isn't going to know what to do with that, regardless of what tooling you're using. So yeah, the answer, lack of preparation for me, James.
Great. Thanks, Chris. Gary, what are your thoughts on this?
I mean, yeah, to elaborate a little bit on the preparation, and it's what I mentioned there, is the security and governance. I mean, ultimately, a lot of people kind of think sometimes just plug AI into it and it'll kind of take care of it. But ensuring that the guardrails are in place in terms of what sort of data is accessible, that any sort of data source you're connecting to, it itself has row level security enabled, and that basically that is set at a source level. The security and governance needs to be a day zero conversation that you have within the organization before onboarding any of these toolings. So that it feeds into that preparation part, and then obviously as well is skilling and onboarding of the organization into a lot of this as well. Like those typically are two of the biggest things that we come across with customers when they're beginning to look into these tools.
Brilliant. Thanks, Gary. Terry.
Yeah, probably to build on those. So, guardrails are key, but also keep the human in the loop. Guardrails are not just going to be done by Copilot. You need the people to make sure that the things like the least privileged access and all that is actually set up, and where the red lines are set and all that. So you need that. That's key. I think it's also not to think it's a toggle mentality. People think you just switch Copilot on, or you switch AI on in the organization. You don't. You have to do these guardrails and have it. And you have to have the training. We work with clients that are now publishing what we call golden prompts. So training the users to ask particular questions and how to ask them and stuff like that. And come with ideas of how to use it in use cases where you can improve efficiencies, because again, it seems like a bit of a silver bullet. People think this will solve the world, but come with a use case. Like I'll take my one lazy on Monday morning. My agent reads me my emails from last week and tells me what I've got to do this week. Saves me doing it, but it was a use case that I needed to implement for me.
Yeah, great stuff. Thank you, Terry. So hopefully today's webinar has given you a taste of the AI capabilities that are available within Fabric. We're helping organizations to transform their workflows and processes with data and AI. And we currently have a funded offer available that we call the AI Incubator. It's available to qualified Microsoft customers that are going to be using Fabric and Microsoft AI technology. So if you're interested in applying some of the techniques we discussed today and other AI capabilities within your organization, please let us know in the feedback form, and one of our client managers will be able to have a conversation with you to discuss how we may be able to shape a Microsoft funded engagement to get you started on your transformation journey using Microsoft technology. This leads me to thank Gary, Terry and Chris for sharing all of your views and opinions with us today. It's been a really great conversation, rich in detail and experience. So I'm very grateful to the three of you for sharing that. Please do reach out to any of us if you have any follow-up questions from today that you didn't have a chance to ask during the webinar. And please do also check out our website for more events that we have planned. You may be interested in a one-day training session that we have that is called Chat with Your Data in a Day. I'm just about to post that into the chat, a link to it. If that's something you or a member of your team would be interested in, please do sign up for that. Spaces will be limited and it's on a first come first serve basis, so get your applications in quick for that. Our in a day events are always incredibly popular. And finally, I'd like to thank you all for joining us today. I hope you found today's session informative and entertaining. Please do join us for future webinars in the series. Thank you very much.